If you have the hubcap on the wheel, go ahead and remove the little caps that hold it on with a 19mm socket. Set this aside, then take off all 5 of your 19mm lug nuts, and then we'll take the wheel off. Next, from behind the brakes, I want to remove this little bolt right here, or nut, I guess, which holds the brake hose in place. Use a 10mm socket, take that off. It helps to spray it with rust penetrant because a lot of times the threads are rusty. There we go. It should slide right out at this point. Now let's move over here, take off the two 14mm bolts that hold this caliper onto the bracket. Okay, leave this one in a couple threads to hold the caliper while you take off this top one. Take off both of them, and then you'll most likely need a pry bar. And just gently pry this caliper off. Set it up on top of the knuckle, that way there's no pressure on this brake hose. Now let's take off the pads. And now with a 15mm socket, remove these two bolts, and those hold the caliper bracket onto the knuckle. There's one, leave this one in. Take this off, remove your caliper bracket, set that aside. Now you can remove your rotor. Now at this point, my hub is very clean, so what I'm going to do is just take a wire brush and brush off the surface rust here, which there really isn't much of it. So it looks like someone has recently replaced this. Most likely, yours, unless it was recently replaced, is not going to be as clean, in which case you'll have to sand it down, make sure it is nice and smooth, because you want the rotor to have a nice, flush, flat surface to sit on. And if that's not the case, then you'll get braking issues. So now that it's cleaned off, let's rinse it with some brake parts cleaner. Once it dried off, apply some anti-seize, especially to this outer and inner ring. In the center here, it's kind of optional, but it does help. But just make sure you apply anti-seize. That way the rotor doesn't seize onto the hub and rust doesn't build up in the future. I'm just going to focus on this outer ring here. And the inner ring, and in the center if you feel like it. But again, that part is optional because it doesn't actually contact the rotor in the middle there. Now take your new rotor and put it on, and I like to start with it on backwards. That way I can easily clean this surface here. And you need to clean it because it's coated with oil from the factory so that it doesn't rust on the shelf. You need to get all of that oil off with using some brake parts cleaner and a clean rag. Now flip it around, install it the right way, and clean off this outer surface as well. Now with the caliper bracket on the workbench, you can remove these anti-rattle clips, set them aside, and we have to clean these areas here where they actually ride. You can use a wire brush if yours isn't too rusty, and it looks like mine's cleaning up decently, so I'm going to continue with a wire brush. If not, you could use some sandpaper, maybe a screwdriver or pry bar, and chisel away at the rust, or even a slight cutting disc. Very careful with that if you're going to use it, preferably sandpaper. Whatever you do, you want to remove all the rust chunks and have a nice flat surface left at the end. That way the new anti-rattle clips can go on easily on a flat surface and there will be no issues. Otherwise the pads will bind in between those two areas. And do the same to this side. Now you want to take a thin layer of grease and apply it to those areas. That's going to prevent any further rust from building up. The reason you want it thin is because you don't want it to squeeze out and get in the middle here where the rotor rides, and it's going to get on your rotor, and of course grease on your rotor is a bad thing. I'm going to have to wipe some off because I put a little bit too much, but just a thin layer like I said, and if needed, wipe it off. Now get your new anti-rattle clips, slide them over and press them down just like so, of course on both sides. All right, and now what you want to do is take out the slider pins, and we'll have to clean those up. If yours are rusted and stuck in there, you'll have to unseize them and then clean them off. A lot of times when they are rusted, they tend to get pitted and damaged, and so you'll have to replace them. Mine are still good, so I'm wiping the old grease off and I'm just going to apply new grease. And even this ridge up here is clean for me, so I'm going to just leave it, maybe give it a quick wire brush. But you need that ridge to be clean because that's where this boot seals up against, and if it's got rust or debris, it won't make a good seal. Water's going to get in there and you're going to have issues. All right, that looks pretty good. Just going to wipe off the end of the boot here. That way there's no sand. Take a little bit of grease, and I like to put it inside the boot. This will act as a reserve of grease in there. And then put some on the slider. Make sure you get it all over, all around, just like that. Make sure you get it up in this ridge here. That's where the boot seals, and grease will help it along. Press it down. Now you saw that, I guess I should have mentioned this earlier, you noticed that this slider had a little boot on it. Make sure that that one goes into its corresponding hole. To get the excess air out, I'm pressing on the slider and squeezing the boot. And now you want to do the same thing to the other side. This one does not have a boot on it or a little rubber piece, so that's why I did them one at a time. That way I can make sure that they go back into their corresponding spot. Clean this one up as well. We'll grease it up and we'll install the caliper bracket onto the vehicle. Take the caliper bracket, slide it over, line it up with the bolt holes, slide the 2 bolts in. I cleaned up the threads, and if you wanted to put anything on them, put thread locker, definitely not anti-seize or grease or anything like that. That is not what you want on your brake bolts. Start them on. Let's bottom them out and then we'll torque them. 96 foot-pounds for both of these. Let's get the pads on. I'm going to start with the outer pad. Just slide it on. Make sure it slides easily like this one. Otherwise, that means you didn't clean up the bracket enough and the pad's getting crushed in between because of rust buildup. The inner pad will actually be getting this wear indicator, and I like to put it on the drag side of the pad. So basically what that means is as the rotor's spinning to go forward, it's spinning down this way here, and I want the rotor to drag this clip away from the pad. If I put it on the top, it's going to jam it into the pad and this won't make any noise. This is like a little spring-loaded clip. So the way to install this is right down here. You'll see it has an area where it can mount. You have to just slide it over like this as you press, and it should clip right on. There we go. It takes quite a bit of force, but once it's on there. You want it to be nice and tight. Now once your pad wears down to this will hit the rotor, make noise, let you know you need new pads. Slide this on. There we go. This one also slides very easily, so that's perfect. Now let's grab our caliper, and we can't install it just yet because we need to push this piston back to make up for the size of the new pads. The way I like to do it is grab an old pad, grab my caliper depression tool, and you can use any type of caliper depression tool or even large pliers. Basically, whatever you're using, you want to make sure that this piston goes in nice and smoothly, which it is. You want to go slow, it's not a race, and you want to make sure that there's no debris around here. I already checked it, it's fine. Otherwise the debris gets stuck inside the boot and then the boot doesn't work as well as it should. So you want to go slow. If this takes a lot of force to press, your caliper's seized and you'll need a new one. And I'm going to go all the way till it's bottomed out, which this one is. Take this out. We don't need that anymore. Now I want to put a little bit of grease on the face of this piston or the outer ring of this piston. This will help the pads operate quietly and smoothly, as well as on these 2 ears here on the inside for the same exact reason. Bring the caliper over the pads, make sure it slides over these 2 sliders and lines up. Sometimes you have to twist these to get them to line up properly. Grab your 2 caliper to bracket bolts, start them, snug them, and then we'll torque them to 26 foot-pounds. All right, there you go. Don't forget to get this bracket back in here, line it up, put on the nut, snug it up. There you go. Now do the same thing to the other side, and then let's put the wheel on. Let's get the wheel back on. Start on all 5 of your lug nuts, snug them up, and torque them to 100 foot-pounds. And if your vehicle came equipped with these hubcaps, make sure you line up this hole with the valve stem. Slide them on, line up all the lug nuts with these caps, and then just tighten this on. This is what holds on the hubcap, so you want to make sure that it's tight. otherwise it'll go flying off the road.